Greetings and welcome. We are in 303, Senior English A, and we now turn back to the third of our three offerings from the Exeter book. Your hymnal should be open to page 30 and 31, and we're now going to be looking at a little bit different poem from the two representative models from the Exeter book. Let's go ahead really quickly and just identify at 3A the differences between already the wife's lament, as we will be looking at it, translated here by Anne Stafford, and the other two offerings from the Exeter book, namely Seafarer and Wanderer. First and most obvious difference between those two and this poem, in those two poems we had a male speaker, an Anglo-Saxon warrior. Here in this poem, a female speaker. A female speaker. Whoa, now that's significant because we have already studied Beowulf and the Beowulf epic as we now come to the study of this poem, and immediately the thought occurs to us, and we're going to write this down in our annotations at level 1, we haven't seen or heard from very many women. The Anglo-Saxon world, that world of the Vikings as we sometimes think of them, is predominantly, we think of often, a male world, because it is the world of warriors. Of course, the truth of the matter is, it is not just a male world at all. And one of the classic renderings of the wife's lament is this question: when the warrior males go off to fight, and they leave behind their female companions, their wives, their daughters, their sisters, there is a tremendous challenge for those women left behind. We, of course, know that those women had to as well be trained in self-defense, because when the men left, the women had to defend, and we know that many of these women were themselves warriors and tremendously gifted warriors and fighters, right? So we're going to look at this poem from that perspective. Number 2 difference. In the earlier two poems, the Seafarer and the Wanderer, we are going to have a sailor alone at sea, exiled at sea. Here, let's write it down at level 1. We are going to have a poem as well about exile and dislocation, but here the exile and dislocation don't have anything to do with the sea, but rather with the land. With the land. In other words, you can be exiled not only at sea, but also on land. And we're going to have a situation here where the speaker of this poem has been sent into exile. Are you ready for this? By her husband. By her husband. Okay? In other words, this is going to be a poem that suggests that guys and girls, and the relationship between guys and girls is a very old kind of dialectic or struggle. And here we're going to have a woman who is sent into exile. She, however, still longs for her guy. She's bitter and angry about how friendless and lonely and joyless she is. It's a sad poem again. So let's go ahead and write this down. If you're looking for a happy poem, this is not the poem to go to. But then, hello, it's right there in the title. Let's go ahead and write the word lament down. The word lament means sad song. A lamentation is a sad song. For those of you who want to jot it down at 3A, the text from the Judeo-Christian Bible called Lamentations is a collection of sad poems. If you're not familiar with them, you should take a look at them. They're quite remarkable. Sad poems. And that is to say then a lamentation. All right?
Sorry, Father.
No worries.
Can you stop down and see me? I got a challenge for your English kids.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll see you in a bit. A lamentation. That is to say, a sad song. Let's now take a look at the poem itself. Let's point out again, notice those breaks in the middle of the line, these caesuras, these poetic breaks that give you a little bit of an opportunity then to be able to take a bit of a breath. We'll be reading now together, starting on page 30, and we'll notice that this poem is broken up into stanzas of a kind, into parts or stanzas of a kind. Let's take a look at it. I make this song. Are you reading with me on page 30? Again, let me challenge you to make sure that you are following along, reading along with me, and trying to understand as well as you can what it is that you're reading. The Wife's Lament. I make this song about me full sadly, my own wayfaring. I, a woman, tell what griefs I had since I grew up, new or old, never more than now. Ever I know the dark of my exile. Let's go ahead at level 1 and write down really quickly 2 things. 1, first of all, right away, we are going to be told this is a woman speaking. Significantly important in a man's world that they would have a poem about a woman voice, a woman speaker. Number 2, notice she says she has been in exile. She is wayfaring. She is full of griefs and sorrow. In other words, it's not just the men who struggle with the feeling of loneliness and exile, but also a woman's voice as well. Now, we can already point out at 2b the value of this perspective. If you live in a man's world and you are a man, it's very easy to imagine that the world revolves around you. Back in the day, men used to act as if the world revolved around them. Not like today when men never act like this. You can appreciate the irony of my observation. But it makes sense that if you are living in a man's world and you hear a poem written with a female voice, it makes you pause for a moment and go, oh yeah. When we, for example, as warriors go off on these journeys that can take up to 2 years, they can go on wars that can last 2 years before they get back home. What do the women do while we're gone? And what's their life like? Here, we're going to have a situation where we'll have a woman who has been mistreated by her man. Back in the day, men used to be mean to their girls. Not like today when guys are never mean to girls. Today, guys are always nice to girls and never mean. See, again, we appreciate the irony of that observation. All of a sudden, you're going to read this poem as a remarkably modern poem. Let's take a look now at the second one, at the second stanza. She's going to tell us what has gone wrong. Go ahead and write it down at level 1. All the garbage that's wrong in her life. Let's go ahead and take a look at it now. She's going to list for us all the stuff that's gone wrong in her life. She says it this way, starting at line 6. First, my Lord went out, away from his people, over the wave tumult. So let's just say it. Her husband, her man, my Lord, went out and went away over on the waves. In other words, out on a journey on the ocean, just like we were reading from the other 2 poems. I grieved each dawn. Grieved means I was sad. Wondered where my Lord, my first on earth, might be. Then I went forth, a friendless exile, to seek service in my sorrow's need. In other words, she says, my man left me all alone. I have nothing. I have no way to take care of myself. A student once studying this poem made the observation, this reminds me of the father and husband that left me and my mom when we were very young. And he just walked out the door and never came back. And my mom and I were just completely left alone. And we had to figure it out for ourselves. Never occurred to me, that is a form of exile. That is a form of being all alone. And how does she respond? Let's take a look. My man's kinsmen, that is to say, the family of her guy, began to plot by darkened thought to divide us two. So we most widely in the world's kingdom lived wretchedly, and I suffered longingly. In other words, let's just say it this way, her man's family did not support her. Now, for those of us that have ever been, let's make a 3B observation here. For those of us that have ever been in a situation where we liked somebody else, but the family of that somebody else did not like us, how does that make you feel? How do you get on in a situation like that? More wretchedness, more loneliness. Now, she's all abandoned, isn't she? Later, when we study together Shakespeare's Hamlet, we will meet the fair Ophelia. Obviously, my observation is a relationship to another text. You're writing it down right now at 3a, aren't you? Ophelia, the fair Ophelia, will become abandoned, left alone, stranded, and tragically will, of course, lose her mind and then her life to suicide. That Ophelia complex, as we sometimes will refer to it, actually can trace its lineage back to poems like The Wife's Lament. Let's take a look. Notice she says, I am really sad because the man who was supposed to take care of me didn't. And the family of the man who should have also taken care of me, didn't. Line 15. My Lord commanded me to move my dwelling here. I had few loved ones in this land or faithful friends. For this my heart grieves, and I should find the man well matched to me, hard of fortune, mournful of mind, hiding his mood, thinking of murder. Whoa! Now there's a lot about this poem we don't understand as we try to understand and read through it and exegete it. But one of the things we can say right away is that she was totally into this guy, but this guy let her down. He didn't treat her right. Are you ready for this? She didn't really completely understand who he was. She didn't know how he was going to treat her. And now she's all alone. She's left stranded. Any girl who has ever been stranded by a guy who she totally trusted in, she put her faith in him, and then he blew her up. Here we go. This is exactly what's going on now in this poem. Her sadness, her lamentation. Notice, she'll now begin to remember what they were like when they first got together. This is one of the sad parts of our poem, is that she can remember when they first got together, it was really good. Why is it, 3B question, why is it so often the case that when the relationship begins, it's awesome, awesome, everything goes so well, and then something goes sideways, and then the pain, and then the remembering of the good times and the ways in which that brings even more pain. Fascinating. Notice she begins by saying, blithe or cheerful was our bearing. Often we vowed that but death alone would part us two, naught else. They made promises to each other. We will never part except for death. But this is turned round now as if it never were our friendship. I must far and near bear the anger of my beloved. The man sent me out to live in the woods under an oak tree, in this den in the earth. Ancient this earth hall, I am all longing. Whoa, let's write this down. Fine line between love and hate. Fine line between taking care of someone you love and rejecting someone you love. She says, dude, when we got together, it was so awesome. He was blithe, happy. We made promises. We would stay together until we died. Now, he sent me away and I have to live under a tree because I got no house. I got no place to live. How can you explain the fact that a man could be so in love with a woman and then destroy her like this? How can you explain that fact? That fine line between really in love with someone and then rejecting them. And then, how does it make her feel? Notice that on page 31, at the top of the page, starting at line 30, we will have, again, the capacity to read this poem both literally, that is to say, the descriptions are actually happening, and metaphorically. That is to say, this is going to not just be the physical landscape, but the landscape of the soul, the landscape of the spirit. Poetic rendering of simply the observation, I'm really sad. But notice the beautiful poetry here. The valleys are dark, the hills high, the yard overgrown, bitter with briars, a joyless dwelling. Where she lives is not a happy place, both physically and emotionally. Anybody that's ever gone through a breakup can totally resonate with this and understand what this means. Everybody else around you can be happy, smiling. You're going through this terrible breakup and your heart can't be happy. And to that degree, the valleys are dark and the hills are high and the yard is overgrown. Not now literally, but what do we say? Metaphorically, right? Full oft, I'm at line 33. Full oft the lack of my Lord seizes me cruelly here. In other words, she says, all of a sudden, I can remember that I should be with my guy and I'm not, and I can get really sad about that. Jot down at 3B, the last time you had to go through some kind of breakup like this. Did you ever have this experience where, for example, either a friendship or a relationship with a parent or a relationship maybe because of death with somebody else, you had this really close relationship and then all of a sudden it was gone and you all of a sudden started thinking about that someone and then you got really sad. It made you all of a sudden, you're like, there I am, right back again. Of course, the penultimate example of this is the girl who gets blown up by her guy in the senior year, and she says, I'm not going to think about him. I'm not going to think about him. I'm not going to think about him. And of course, then her friend says, you're clearly thinking about him. That's why you keep talking about him. I'm not going to think about him. How do you put out of your mind someone who used to be very close to you? How can you forget? You'll maybe remember, to make another 3A observation, when you were a freshman and you studied, for example, Romeo and Juliet, that Romeo was in love with a girl named Rosaline at the beginning of the play, and Romeo's pal says to him, forget her, put her out of your mind. And Romeo will speak those famous lines, teach me how I should forget. How do you forget? I mean, the heart remembers whether the brain wants to remember or not. Notice she continues, friends there are on earth living beloved, lying in bed, while I at dawn am walking alone under the oak tree through these earth halls. Whoa, everybody else is happy, not me. Seeing smiling, laughing people can actually make some people sad if they are going through a breakup. Whoa. There, she says, under the tree I may sit the summer-long day. There I can weep over my exile, my many hardships. Hence, I may not rest from this care of heart, which belongs to me ever, nor all this longing that has caught me in this life. 3B question. When was the last time you really cried? I like to ask this question to seniors. Put it in your mind. Can you write it down? When was the last time you cried really sad tears? Not tears of joy, but tears of sadness. She says, I weep like that. And I go for walks in the morning. And I don't have my guy. And everybody else is smiling. And everybody else has pals. And I got nothing. And I'm sad about that. I've been poorly treated by my guy. And I am not happy about it. Question. Has she forgotten him? How do you get rid of a memory of someone that you loved who now treats you like garbage? That's the question of this poem. How do you do it? Now we're going to get to the last stanza, and some of you are really going to smile about this one because Mama's about had enough, and now she's ready to say, this is what I hope happens to this scumbag who blew me up. This, of course, is going to make some of us really smile and begs the obvious question, why does the girl who is totally in love with the guy, who gets blown up by the guy, then sit down and write a really nasty letter about him? Or say mean things about him, right? And say, this is what I hope happens to you. Take a look at what she says. Notice what she calls her guy. Do you see it? I'm reading with you now at line 43. Notice she calls him, may that young man. She doesn't call him her guy. That guy. In other words, it's not my guy anymore, it's that guy. May that young man be sad-minded always, hard, his heart's thought, while he must wear a blithe bearing, with care in the breast, a crowd of sorrows. I had a student once, and she said this, really close with my guy, thought we were going to work through all of our problems. He blows me up and goes and finds my best friend. Come to find out, that's the reason he blew me up. He had been messing around with my best friend. She said, it broke my heart. Totally broke my heart because I had totally trusted him and totally broke my heart. And so she said the worst part of it was he would come to school smiling and happy, like he wasn't sad at all. This poem, though, seems to suggest he may be faking it. He may not be as happy as he appears, at all. Notice she says, I hope that he's really sad. I hope that he's not happy at all like he puts on like he is. Notice line 45. May on himself depend all his world's joy. In other words, I hope he never finds another girl that can make him happy. I hope that he lives all alone, sad. May he be outlawed far in a strange folkland, that my beloved sits under a rocky cliff, rimed with frost, O Lord, dreary in spirit, drenched with water, in a ruined hall. In other words, he went off on his little journey, and I hope that he gets stuck all by himself, having to sit in the middle of a frozen ocean. Now, of course, we can jot down really quickly the irony. We just read 2 poems where male speakers say, I'm stuck all alone on a frozen ocean. And some readers of these 3 poems have said, now the other shoe drops. We find out why those 2 speakers were all alone. They must have blown up their girl and run off. And guess what? She got her wish. Her wish was, I hope he gets jacked all alone in the middle of nowhere and he's freezing to death. Does she still love him? This is an interesting question. It's an interesting question in 3b. Does she still love him? And of course, the real question is, why would a girl continue to love a guy who blows her up? It makes absolutely no sense at all. The guy was nice, and then he wasn't. And then she says, well, I'm not in love with him anymore. I hope a big rock falls on his head. And yet, there seems to be some suggestion here. Maybe she's still in love with this man. My Lord endures much care of mine, line 50-51. He remembers too often a happier dwelling. Woe be to them that for a loved one must wait in longing. Whoa. Saddest thing, she says, in the whole wide world is to be in love with someone you can't be with. Saddest thing in the whole wide world. Or to have been in love with someone, and then that someone leaves you all alone, and you have to live with that.